What time is it? It's time for another Every Other Wednesday.
We have a sign?
Oh, no. And do we have a
no.
question? Do we have a question? I thought of
Oh
a
my
couple
God.
questions.
We're scrambling.
Well, hey, I can do it on mine. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Have you got a sign? It's
I just
just
made one.
Sunjay and me today.
Wait, I won't do it yet.
That's not great. That's not much, but okay. And do we have a question for our esteemed
I was doing the sign.
audience?
You're on the question, dude.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, people are starting to roll in. Hello, welcome. You may notice that I'm in a very weird place. We'll talk about that once we get started. And Sunjay is in his usual place. Sunjay, have you ever joined us from a secret undisclosed location, or have you always joined us from your
No, I've
place?
definitely remember a few times. Like one time when I was Jeff and I were at that
Oh, that's
steak
right.
together.
Yeah.
But I've definitely joined from some hotels and stuff in the past.
Oh,
I've been in
that's right.
Vegas.
That's
In
right.
Vegas, I
That's right.
joined once. I remember.
That's right. I remember.
Generally, though, I'm too lazy to do it. So if I'm away,
Well,
I'm not
well, I mean,
nearly as keen as you.
well, I mean, obviously I'm away, but if I hadn't shown up, it would have just been you, and I couldn't do that to the
It
audience.
not could have. It would have been a disaster. It would have been ugly.
Oh gosh. Well, listen, it's the top of the hour. Shall we go ahead and get started, or wait another minute or two?
I would say we wait a minute or two.
Carol is there. Carol says we're live, and as long as Carol's here, we can get started.
There you
So,
go.
hello everybody, and welcome to Every Other Wednesday. Gosh, there's only two of us, and that's Sunjay and me. And so, Sunjay, you have a couple of announcements to make at the beginning, right?
First of all, I would like to say today is September 18th, 2024, and welcome to Every Other Wednesday. Quick housekeeping detail. On your chat, for some people, it defaults to panelists and hosts only. So drop your to button and make sure it says to everyone. So when we are interacting and sharing, that we can all share from each other's and learn from each other's wisdom. With that said, I want to say welcome. My name is Sunjay Nath. I am a speaker and author focusing on leadership and performance, best known for a concept called the 10-80-10 principle. And I am based just outside of Toronto, Ontario, in Canada. Mr. Richard Hadden, you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I will. Hi, I'm Richard Hadden, and I'm an author and a speaker, and I wrote the Contented Cows books. I talk about leadership, employee engagement, and recruiting and retention. And I live in Jacksonville, Florida, but at the moment, I am in a secret undisclosed location in the Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport in the Sky Club in Concourse G, which has three private cubicles that look like phone booths, if some of you remember phone booths, but they'd have no phones in them, except mine has a phone in it because it's got this in it. But anyways, very small. So I know this is very kind of up close and personal, maybe too much Richard, but here I am. I'm just glad I'm not so secret now, Rob says. And actually, I'm on my way to Green Bay, Wisconsin, and then from there to Egg Harbor, Wisconsin, where I'll speak at a conference tomorrow.
Couple things. One is a phone booth without a phone is just called a booth.
Just called a booth. Yeah.
Secondly, when you say it's a secret undisclosed location and then you give us the exact location and details, it's no longer secret. I'm just saying.
Rob has made this point as well. So anyway, so do we have a question for our group today? Because I do.
You do have a question for them?
Yeah. Just the opening question, and I think it's a seasonal question, and that is, are you starting to feel a change of season where you live or where you are these days? It has started in North Florida, where we have gone from horribly hot to pleasantly warm.
I would say it's starting to feel but not see around here. So the kids are back to school, so that's like a change of season, but the weather's been just drop dead gorgeous.
Wow, great. Okay, good. Well, and in Minneapolis at the moment, it is, pretty DDG as well, right here. Carol had to put on long pants, but late September and October always get hot again for a while. Yeah, and Carol's in Southern California. All right, we'll continue to, as people are coming in, continue to contribute to that question. Nova Scotia. I just love the idea of being, I just love the idea of being in Nova Scotia. Little trivia, do you know, in Alaska, the leaves are dropping. I would assume the temperatures are too. Just a little bit of trivia. My wife's great-grandmother was born in Nova Scotia.
There you go.
Yeah. And I
did not know that. Shall we get started?
Let's do.
With Richard and I on the program today, we were discussing what we could do. We came across an article. It's called "What is a Toxic Work Culture?" And we kind of use that as the basis of our discussion. And what they've done is they've gone through and they've flagged 18 possible flags for you have a toxic workplace. We will provide you the link for the article at the end, but like a school teacher, we don't want you reading ahead. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna we're not even gonna go through all 18 because that would just be ridiculous. We're gonna pick a few and we're gonna kind of discuss back and forth whether we agree or disagree. Some of the stuff both Richard and I said, yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think they're missing the ball on that one. And so we'll kind of go through it and get some ideas from you guys, and that's the plan. And I hope that's okay because there isn't another.
That's what we got. That's what we got. Yeah, Jeff is off today, getting ready to speak somewhere, and Mike is in a very exotic location, which he'll disclose if he wants to, but we won't. Anyway, I mean, the question is to start off with: have you, audience, and Sunjay, have you ever worked in what you would have described as a toxic workplace?
Are we including every other Wednesday as work?
No. That's excluded. Yeah. Because I have. Amy has, Jenny has, Eric
the problem
has.
with me is I've never had a real job. So
we'll see. I haven't in a long time. And maybe one of the reasons that I haven't is because the last place that I was a pretty toxic workplace.
As you can appreciate, as a speaker, sometimes you can walk into a room and you smell toxic breath. Like
you do.
You cannot wait to get out of there. I'm only speaking an hour, but it's going to be a long hour. And when's the flight?
Yeah. This is interesting. Shelley says, she has more than once. Maybe it's me. Shelley, I bet it's not. And then Jenny brings up a really, and I'd love to hear from some others as to maybe what were some of the hallmarks of the toxic workplace where you worked. And Jenny says, no security. People would get fired on the spot. Some days, no warning.
Nice. By the way, the other thing too is the switch from happy-go-lucky to toxic can be very, very quick. So I'll use the example. When I was doing my MBA, and this is early 2000, and this is a Canadian example, but maybe it will resonate as well. Nortel was one of the biggest companies in Canada, but also even within North America. And it was the place to be. It was buzzing, it was humming. If you walk the halls of Nortel, it was like Google on steroids. It was awesome. And so for people that have done an MBA, it's all group work. And back then there was no Zoom. So we actually had to physically meet in person. And one of my group members was from Nortel. And we used to often meet at his place because it was, again, a cool place to be. And from the time I started my MBA to the time I graduated, Nortel had its peak and its plummet. And so we used to walk into the halls, walking there again, buzzing and hopping and laughter. And I remember times when going to his office and people were crying as they were getting fired and getting escorted out of the building. And so you went from the place to ultra toxic.
Wow. Yeah. Some good comments and questions in the chat. Let's look at those. Dan brings up a really good point. He says, he thinks I've had some toxic supervisors that make work unpleasant, but I'm not sure I'd describe the overall workplace as toxic. Now that's interesting because it suggests that an organization's culture can survive some pockets of toxicity.
Well, if the organization is large enough, I promise you there's going to be pockets of toxicity. And that's just the nature of numbers, right?
Yeah.
If you're large enough, you're going to have that. And we've said this time and time again, people don't leave jobs, they leave people. So, I mean, Dan probably can relate to wanting to get away from that boss or that supervisor, even if he's staying within the actual company in a different division or a different branch.
Yeah. And Carol, now this is an important question too. She says, what's your definition of toxic? Because that's one of the words that people are not necessarily defining correctly or consistently. Sunjay, what is toxic? I mean, it's kind of like what the Supreme Court said about pornography. It's hard to define, but it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it. I think toxicity should be defined, but you can definitely know it when you feel it. I would just think, I don't know, a couple of things that occur to me. The definition of toxic is that no matter what you do, it's not good enough. That people are there's an unhealthy competition there, that there's just vibes of negativity everywhere. And essentially the outcome is that nobody wants to be there, but they may feel trapped into being there for different reasons. That's just part of the definition that I would give to toxicity.
I would use, if I'm using more of a higher level generic thing, I would say that no matter what goes on, every day you leave more drained than when you came in.
Yeah,
So,
that's
even,
good, because
even if you have a win
takes
or
it out of you.
success,
Yeah.
because I get it. If you're, I don't know, you're digging ditches for a living, physically, yeah, it's a demanding thing, but there's a sense of accomplishment when you do things. But in a toxic environment, like you said, it's never enough. You're always belittled. You feel yucky. So I go with it. If you're consistently feeling worse when you leave than when you come in, you got a toxic environment. It's draining.
Yeah. I've also heard it said that if you hate your job but you love your work, that could be an indicator of a toxic environment. You love what you're doing, but you hate where you're doing it or who you're doing it with. That could be one indicator of that.
It could be a bad marriage too. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's kind of jump into it. Again, we're not going to go through all of them, but and you and I both agreed, probably the first one that they mention in this list is probably the most important one. And what they say is, and by the way this article is set up, just basically lists 18, and then it says the problem, and then it offers a fix. And so we might reference them. So first one, it says core values are absent. Which, I mean, yeah. What do you say about that, Richard?
Well, I think having core values as an organization is absolutely critical, but the fact that they are printed on some poster or engraved in the wall does not make them your core values. There can be the coincidence of when what is printed on the wall and engraved on the wall and on the plaque are in fact the core values that are demonstrated every day. And when that happens, I think that's great. Very rarely have I seen an organization that had a listed set of core values that was bad or toxic. So I think generally these core values are good. The question is, are we living them? And I'm not so cynical as to say that no organization is living these wonderful core values. Some definitely are. So I think, having them documented somewhere is good because it reminds us. But to me, the best evidence of the core values is how are people living there in the organization. So yeah, you definitely got to have core values. What makes it really bad is if you have a list of core values and what actually is happening is inconsistent with that. And then people see that and suddenly you start to get a little arsenic coming into the system.
Yeah. And the way they worded it too, they say core values are absent. And unfortunately, I'm going to disagree with the premise. You cannot have your
you can't. You have core values no matter what.
Right. The values might be cheat the system. The values might be do as little work as you can and try to get paid the most. The values might be create tremendous value for our customers, or let's get along and create a wonderful organizational work culture. But you have values. Now the problem is if the values that you want are not present, then yes, then you potentially have a toxic workplace. And to your point, you don't just throw them up on a plaque. That to me is about how you generate them, right? Is it one guy who, drew the shortest straw, sits in at lunch and, oh, these values sound good. Okay, staple them to the wall. We're good to go. Or
they paid a corporate communications organization a lot of money to create these words.
Right. And the key to me on all values, especially if they're what's the word when you strive for it? Aspirational values. When there are aspirational values, you have to have buy-in from every level, and from the front line to the executives, so that everyone feels. And then it doesn't mean they have to have a 17-day retreat and you waste a whole bunch of company resources, but it could be something as simple as to the front, because it depends on the size of the organization, but you go to the frontline people, hey, give us the top 3 most important things to you in a job. And they take those, and because there's 1,000 frontline workers and they have 30,000 bits, and they combine them and they go, okay, of the 30,000, we have 600 that are predominant. Then it goes to middle management, and you go to the middle management, take these 600 and cut it down to 30. Okay. And then you go to upper management and from these 30, rank the top 10, whatever. And then from that, you articulate it. Then you maybe have a draft, and the draft goes up in the front lobby, and you ask people's input for the next 30 days. And then from there, you go and you articulate something. And then again, it's not thrown at them, but everyone has an opportunity to be part of the discussion, because some people aren't going to care, and some people are going to care a whole lot.
Right. Yeah. And, I sometimes think organizations ask too much of the written value statement or the written mission statement, because that's not going to change anything. It does help to anchor us. But two things come to mind for me. My friend and business partner, Bill Catlett, was very early on in the Leadership Development Academy at FedEx, and he tells a story. And FedEx was a great place to work for him, and it still is a great place to work. I think for most of the corporate level, and Sunjay has an interesting perspective on that. But FedEx USA, I will say. But the story is that many years ago, Fred Smith took all the senior leadership, including my friend Bill, up literally to a mountaintop retreat where they came up with these core values. And then they literally, Bill says, like Moses, they had them engraved in stone, on stone tablets. And everybody got, as a paperweight, the stone tablet with the values on it. And he said that isn't what created the values. But there's a quote from the late jazz saxophonist Charlie Yardbird Parker, where he was talking about music, and he said, if you don't live it, it won't come out of your horn. And that has always really resonated with me, that leaders have got to live those values. And if they don't, you can't just talk about them. It just won't come out of your horn.
Yeah. By the way, when you were referencing a tablet, and that would have been late 70s, early 80s, that was the time frame there. It was a different type of tablet, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. But you've said this before.
Yeah, stone tablet, not one like this.
Exactly. Yeah. We've said this before, though, that the culture are the unwritten rules. So it's how do people behave? If there's a piece of garbage on the floor, do they bend over when no one's watching? Do they bend over and pick it up, or do they kick it, or do they ignore it? And I mean, those are what the values of the organization are. What are people doing? What are the unwritten rules when no one is watching? How are people behaving? Are they bad-mouthing the organization? Are they praising the organization? Are they referencing or referring? Are they trying to recruit their buddies going, you got to be here. This is where it's at.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, we both agree, though, that's probably the fundamental thing. And what I found interesting about this article as well is, the 18 signs, and then they have the fix. The fix is always the same. The fix is improve the culture.
Right. Exactly. Amazing.
So,
hey, let's look at what the wisdom of our audience has put on the chat box since we looked last 10 minutes ago. So Patty says, talking about negative culture, toxic culture, throwing people under the bus. She says, I still have some tire tracks on my back. It was so bad. Thank you for that word picture, Patty. Vanessa says negativity, gossiping, constant complaining. Erica, we weren't allowed to talk to each other. Taking time off was severely restricted. Micromanagement, belittling, being pulled into HR several times because company didn't know the extent of what was happening.
Sorry, I need to insert a smart ass remark here. Erica, we're talking about jobs, not jail. Okay.
So. Right. Shelley, no communication in general. Now there's a lesson there that I think might come up in some of this other. Put a pin in that communication in general, but for the business goals, no training, lack of support, either for good things or bad, no direction, no emotional safety. Now we're getting, I think, into areas of toxicity. No emotional safety, those cause toxic environments.
Yeah.
We'll come back to some of these great comments in a little bit, but Sunjay, carry on.
Yeah. So number two really ties into number one, which is it says management don't follow the core values. And we were kind of ready to touch on that. There's a hypocrisy, right? You gotta walk the walk. What's worse than not having the articulation of the values is having the values and doing nothing about it. Or having the values and acting counter to them. Then people kind of go.
Yeah, that creates such a cynicism that is toxic.
Yeah. And then people kind of go, you a bunch of messages and none of them are good. Some of them go, they don't really care. Okay. It's just crap. All right. The rules don't apply to management. And so there's all these messages that are not good. So the idea being, if you're gonna go through the effort of piecing them together and articulating them, yeah, you know, like you were saying about the music, right? You need to live it, otherwise it's not coming out of the horn.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
number three, this is one that you'd highlighted too, Richard, which is office gossip runs rampant. And we also heard this too in the
Yeah.
chat box. A lot of, you know,
Just
not
negativity and talking about people. I don't know. I think I think that that when gossip is going on anywhere, it's because there's not enough to keep us engaged in more productive um, endeavors. And so, yeah, the gossip just keeps going. I also think that gossip indicates a lack of goodwill for the people around us. We might see people, if you're in an environment of really goodwill and somebody does something or you hear something about them, you hope it's not true. In the opposite situation, you hope it is true and you do everything you can to promote it, whether it's true or not.
right. The other thing too around the gossip is that you're saying that sometimes people are bored and they're looking for something to do. And also, and I think it was Carol that was saying it, that there's a difference between
Yeah.
the organization being toxic and
You
people.
not being good at your job.
Right. And so there is a difference. Just because someone reprimands you or someone tells you you're not doing a good job, that does not mean it's a toxic environment.
Exactly.
In fact, it can be a really healthy environment. It's what's said, how is it said, and what's
How
the
it's
outcome of it.
said.
Yeah.
That's right. And is it used in order to belittle you, in order to create some emotional damage to you, or is it used to try to give you the opportunity to make improvements?
And how you can give that feedback. I'm sure you've heard the old saying. They said a good politician can tell you to go to hell, and you look forward to the trip, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so
That's also been described as the definition of tact. Yeah.
there you go. Yeah. So that's what we want is not to not give feedback. We want to have an environment where it's safe. We've heard emotional safety, where we can say, hey, like Richard and I known each other a long time, and the first time we saw each other speak, I remember asking Richard for feedback. And he can say to me, you sucked and you did this and you did that and you did that. But given the relationship we have,
I remember that you didn't suck.
okay, but my point is, no, what I was getting at is you could give me that feedback. And because we had that relationship, there was no offense taken. I know
Yeah.
that feedback is coming from a place that goes, hey, given my experience, here's what I think will make you better. And that's totally how I'm taking it. And that's what you want to do. And again, that's the opposite of a toxic environment. Is you have that healthy workplace that says the coach can tell the athlete, look, you're doing it all wrong, and here's why. And they don't take it personally. They take it as from a place of gratitude because they know it actually makes them better. So, anyway, so gossip. How do we deal with the gossip? Well, again, what's the fix? The fix is more communication. It's deal with it head on. Don't dance around it. I heard that Richard was an AI. I'm going to approach Richard and go, Richard, are you really an AI? Tell me, what's it like to be an AI? The rumor is this. So we want to have those discussions. We want to deal with the elephant in the room. Number four.
I'm reading some of these cool comments.
All right, you
here.
Go. You highlight.
Okay, so here's another one from Rob. A lot written about toxic workplaces. What I've seen time and again and personally experienced too has to do with alignment. I believe individual company alignment ebbs and flows, personal situations, changing views, etc. And it's interesting to see how individuals adapt or not to this.
Yeah, and I think of a teacher. When the teacher has a bad day because they had a fight with their significant other or their kid, and they come to school, you still need to show up. But guess what? You're human. But the question is, what's the trend? Because
yeah.
Is
it a consistent thing, or is it? I mean, I guess Rob always makes us think, and I guess it's the do we have toxic episodes? Do we have toxic moments in an organization and with a particular person, or is it a consistent pattern that really then becomes the culture? Because again, a lot of the definitions of organization culture include the phrase consistent pattern. There's a consistent pattern of behavior, a consistent pattern of assumptions, and so forth. So if it's consistently there, that's one thing. If it's episodic, if it just kind of happens from time to time, that's something you got to pay attention to because that can get out of hand. But sure. I worked in a great place one time that from time to time mostly when sales were not doing well, things would get ugly. But we seemed to be aware of that, and we would try to correct it. I think in truly toxic workplaces, either they don't care or they're not aware.
Yeah. Rob also says, I don't recall anyone owning or taking responsibility for creating or contributing to a toxic environment as anyone. And I know you're saying that very tongue in cheek,
Yeah.
but when you'll notice though that when the shit hits the fan and there is toxicity and it becomes public, people are really good at pointing the finger. And when I'm looking at that, I'm looking at it from a sports lens, right? When the team is winning, everyone's like, oh, this is the best group of boys ever, and we love each other, and we spoon feed each other in the locker room. And then they go on a nice losing streak. And to me, if that happens, how people react tells me a lot about the culture. Because if it's one that's still cohesive, going, hey, you know what, we got each other's back, we're going through a rough stretch, we're getting through this, versus, and we see this, the general manager, the coach, the player, the this, the that. And when they start pointing the fingers, that tells you that the core of the culture was, even though they were winning, it wasn't a strong culture. And the other thing too is we shouldn't confuse results with culture. There are some very toxic workplaces that are very successful, and vice versa. I did some work with a very big company, and I make it a rule never to mention the company's name when I'm not saying something nice. So I won't say who it is, but I walked into the room, and it was a pretty big event, and like the guy that brought me in was a VP, and I kind of said to him, kind of off the record, I'm like, what's going on here? And he knew what I was talking about. He's like, oh, very astute of you. He goes, there's a lot of infighting and but you can smell it. Walk into a room and you just know.
Well, you just see it.
Absolutely. Or you go to a training or a conference, an internal one, and at the lunch, no one's making eye contact. Everyone's looking down, eating their food. There's no versus laughter and hugs and smiles. And you cannot mask it over time. Eventually it's going to show, can people be on their best behavior for a meal? Sure. But it will ooze through the cracks in everything you do. And it's through turnover, and it's through communications, and it's through social media, and it's through so many other things. All right. Number 5. There you go. I just mentioned it. Number 5, it says turnover is high.
I think that is a result or a symptom, not a cause. But let me think about that. Maybe it's a result and a symptom, but it also, I think, exacerbates the problem. Yeah. Okay. That's probably better said.
It's definitely a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have a high turnover. And again, to your earlier point, that it's not just because turnover is high, you have a toxic culture. Because turnover can be high for a bunch of reasons, right? You could be a training ground and your high turnover. Let me go back to sports again. If you're the minor league team and you have high turnover because your players are so good they're getting called up to the big club, that's one thing. It's a really good thing. That means you're training them well and you're preparing them. But in general, the turnover's high because people are leaving the organization, people are leaving people are leaving the team. That is definitely something to flag. And again, what's the fix? Get a better culture.
Yeah.
And here they talk about do better exit interviews. You know what I think? Exit interviews.
I've got a great line about exit interviews.
Okay, you go ahead because I'll bite my tongue.
Okay, so exit interviews are very useful in the same way that autopsies are useful.
Right, and because you get so much, there's so much that goes on that you don't know. Like, are they being polite because they want their last paycheck? Are they being, on the other end, are they being particularly rude because they don't give a flying rat anymore? Like, what's going on there? And it's, we always say this too, prevention is much better than cure. So you're better off doing it on the intake interview side, much more so than the outtake. So you want to reduce turnover, make sure they're a good fit to begin with.
Yeah, but I think it also does bear re-emphasizing that it's kind of a snowball effect. And when people start to, when the rats start to leave the sinking ship, other people look around and say, hey, there must be a reason that so many people are leaving. And then they begin to leave too. Now, sometimes that can be a wake-up call for leadership to say, okay, wow, now we've got so few people here now that we can't even do our work. So we need to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. And then again, in the article, they actually specifically talk about too, if you find yourself in that situation, doing interviews with long-term employees. Why have you stayed here? What works?
Well, stay
Why
interviews,
are people?
yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
get your intel. The more intel you have, the more informed, better decision you can make.
Yeah.
Number 6. Oh, go ahead.
Before we go to number 6, because Kathleen has made a comment that really seems to resonate with a lot of folks. She says she thinks one of the biggest challenges when management really believes they embrace a good culture and they are actually the problem. And then she's gotten a lot of reinforcement on that. And I think that's again, hopefully, if management wants to have a good culture and they think they do, then hopefully they'll be open to the feedback that they don't.
Self-awareness is such a beautiful commodity that not many people necessarily
I
have.
know. I know. The problem with lacking self-awareness is you generally don't know that you have it.
That's it.
Yeah.
And what we need is, everyone needs a good Simon Cowell every now and then.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about people necessarily specifically, but organizations themselves. And that is often the problem. And it's not because of maliciousness, it's because of ignorance. They just don't know what they don't know. And sometimes people are approachable and open to that discussion, and other times they're not because their ego is tied into it. And mentioning that to them, they take it as a personal insult. And then, when we got emotions involved with it, now we're on a completely different plane than if we were just trying to kind of, here's the problem, how do we escalate the problem, how do we move forward?
Yeah.
Uh,
Going to some of the others, as I've written down a few others that I hope you're going to get to, because I want to.
Okay, no, you go. Just we don't have to go in any order.
Well, so the whole idea about, there's some things in this article. It talks about you can tell you have a toxic culture if people are working through lunch or if people are working late and all that. And I disagree that is not necessarily an indicator. It can be, but it's not necessarily an indicator. I think what might be an indicator is if over a long period of time, again, we go into this consistent pattern. If there's a consistent pattern that the work that needs to get done cannot get done in a reasonable amount of time with the resources that we have, and therefore people are burning themselves out, that in the absence of a lot of other things that can make an environment toxic, that in and of itself can poison the environment. And we've probably all seen that and been a part of that, where we just don't have enough people, either by choice because we don't want to spend the money to hire them, or maybe we can't find them, and that's legitimate, but we still require that this volume of production get done. And if you're in a good culture, if people are engaged, if they're enthusiastic, if they're loyal, and they really want to do what they need to do for the team, they're going to give you their discretionary effort, and they're going to go all out until the challenge has been met. But it's not sustainable. It can be done for a period of time, but if the idea is this is the way it works, we're going to all work this much and we're going to work all out, people at some point are going to say, for what?
Yeah. By the way, I was at number 6. Number 6, 7, and 8 are all kind of very much related. I'm just going to read it. 6 was employees often show up late or miss work. 7 says people work through lunch, and 8 says people work later on weekends. So this is an attendance issue. And the other thing, though, too, when I was reading through this, it reminded me of my 6th grade science teacher, who told this it's told this joke about, it was about cause and effect, and just because you see people working through lunch doesn't mean you have a toxic work environment, right? It could mean, and again, these are flags. You want to investigate further. But he used to tell this story. He goes, be careful of your conclusions. He said one day there was a circus frog, and the circus frog had been trained to jump. And so as a scientist grabbed the frog and he said, this is amazing. And he sat the frog down. He said, jump, frog, jump. And the frog jumped. And he said, wow. So he decided in the name of science to cut off one of the frog's legs. And he said to the frog, jump, frog, jump. And the frog kind of struggled, but he just kind of did a little hop and then fell over. And he's like, this is amazing. He said, okay. He cut off the other frog's leg. And he said, jump, frog, jump.
Do you mean the frog's other leg?
Yeah, the other frog's leg.
Just
sorry. He said, jump, frog, jump.
Numbers nerd, word nerd.
Right there, tomato, tomato. And the frog didn't jump. So he said again, jump, frog, jump. Frog didn't jump. So he's like, all right. When you cut off both legs, the frog goes deaf. right? And so, but the deaf frog thing, and I've told, I've used that for years. There's often people have the deaf frog syndrome, and they go, just because of this, it's this, and they go after that. But often we need to investigate more. There are people who work through lunch because they're inspired and they're excited about it, and they don't want to lose their train of thought, and they're stuffing their face, because we've all done that too. We've forgotten to eat, or you've forgotten to go to bed because you're so involved with something.
Let's be very clear. I have never forgotten to eat. I have worked while I'm eating, but I've never forgotten to eat.
Okay, well, you don't forget to eat. You're hungry, but you're like, I'll get to it, because you're so involved and so motivated and inspired by what you're doing. That happens. The same thing with weekends or lunch. And as an entrepreneur, you can probably appreciate this. We don't have regular days.
We don't have regular days, regular hours. Yeah.
But I don't have to go to work. I get to go to work. I'm excited to do it. I'm also excited to nap in the afternoon when I can, but work on the weekends and stuff, because that's out of inspiration. So this is one of those points that I always like. It can be a problem, but more investigation.
Yeah. A frog tail reminds Rob of the Peter principle in the workplace. Yeah, that guy definitely had already reached that level and beyond.
Yeah. When I first heard the Peter principle, and for those who don't know the Peter principle, it says you will be promoted to your level of incompetence. So, you do a good job with your job as a frontline worker, and then great, you become a manager, and then you're doing a good job as a manager, like great, we'll make you a district manager, and then district manager, and great, we'll make you a supervisor, and then you suck at being a supervisor, and they're like, okay, we'll leave you there. and that's a huge problem. And often too, along the same lines, is we take an engineer, and the engineer became an engineer because they love working with their hands, they love doing stuff, or they love getting involved. And they're like, good, you're a wonderful engineer, we'll make you a manager of people. And they took them from their strength, something they're excited and passionate about, and gave them something that made them miserable and that they suck at. And then, as Carol points out, you did a crappy job.
Or they fire you, yeah.
Number 9 is a very obvious one. It says employees experience physical symptoms of work stress. Yeah, that would be a toxic environment. I'm a believer of all physical symptoms have a psychological component to them. So when you start having discomfort, disease, there is some psychological component to it. I don't know. I don't know what you're else say. I mean, duh.
I mean, who wants unhealthy employees working for them? Apparently, some organizations with toxic environments do.
Exactly. Number 10 says employees aren't acknowledged and rewarded. And we've done a lot of shows around acknowledging and rewarding. And that's the other thing too. All 18 of these, we can do a show on each one, which is just kind of an overview. And we've had done shows on a bunch of them too. So, and again, this idea of rewarding in the currency that's important to them.
Yeah.
Acknowledge people in the currency. And again, if they like standing ovations, give them a standing ovation. If they don't like public recognition, pull them aside, give them a pat on the back and a gift certificate. So, but make sure it's in their language.
Yeah. And as I was reading this, I was thinking, maybe it may or may not be an element of a toxic environment, a toxic culture not to give the recognition. It could be an element of a malaise culture, if you will. Certainly people should be given. We know the reward, we know the reaction, we know the response to being appreciated and having that expressed and so forth. We know that they're positive. I think what does create a toxic culture, or contributes to a toxic culture, is if when we do give credit to the wrong person, or if we take credit for something that we did not have any responsibility for. I think that is one element of a toxic culture.
I'm going to jump to number 12, because I know this is one that you definitely wanted to highlight, and we can ramble on about it. It says candidates are judged for culture fit. And I'm going to read what it says. It says the problem, of course, you want every member of the team to feel like they belong in your company culture, but hiring for culture fit is an outdated recruitment strategy that will cost you top talent. So I'll leave it there. So and I know this one irked you.
This one struck a nerve. No. Hiring for culture fit is not an outdated recruiting tactic. In fact, I think it's continues to be a critical one. The question is, what does that mean? Because hiring for culture fit can be code for, let's make sure we only bring in people who look like us, act like us, sound like us, talk like us, think like us, went to the same schools we did, and have the same values and political views that we do. And if that's the case, that's not culture fit for an organization. But I defy any organization to bring in someone who has all of the skills and qualifications and talent and experience necessary for a job, but who does not fit with the organization by virtue of their nature, their character, their values. I defy them to make that into a positive, productive employment situation.
So the idea of culture fit, I agree with you, Richard, by disagreeing with these guys. You absolutely 100% totally want to hire for culture fit. But the key is, what is the culture?
Yeah.
Because if the culture is going to the core values, if the culture is about expanding and growing in different perspectives, then you're hiring for culture fit by picking someone who doesn't fit the culture. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, if the culture is people who look like us, act like us, talk like us, smell like us, be like us, and you hire for that, if that's what the core is, again, that's not for everyone, but there are people who will have a happy career doing that. And I don't think it's for me to judge and say you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Because if they're creating a product and they're getting paid fair market value and people are paying and they're making dollars and they're hiring people who buy into that whole thing and it's a legal product, I don't have the right to say you're doing it wrong. I'm not a big fan of that, but so what? Who cares what I think?
Right. I say that a lot, all the time. I go around saying that a lot.
You and the rest of them.
Yeah. But there's a very telling question that I sometimes will ask managers in an audience, and you probably have a similar question, Sunjay, and that is, I'll ask them, think about the times when you've hired someone and it didn't work out. You hired someone, you thought it was going to be good, and then for some reason, either they left unhappy or you terminated them. Was it because most of the time did it happen because they lacked the skills, the experience, the ability to perform the tasks involved in the job, or is it because you would have described it as a bad fit? And overwhelmingly, managers will say, we let them go because it was a bad fit, not because they couldn't do the job. I think that's very telling. It may not be what describes every single situation, but I think it's very telling.
Yeah, and the reason that is because our hiring practices are such that we're skill obsessed.
Absolutely.
So we go, you check this box, you have this education, you have this experience, and we're really good at that. But we need to get good at the other half as well. Because again, people always say you hire for attitude and you train for skill. And if someone needs to learn how to operate the forklift and they don't know how, but they're open to learning, it's really easy to teach them.
And it can be a fairly simple change to make in your hiring practices, because ordinarily organizations will hire for skills and experience, and maybe after that hurdle has been reached, then they'll look at attitude and culture fit. I'm just suggesting that we switch it around and that we hire first for attitude and culture fit, and then and only then, if we reach that hurdle, now let's look at the other things that matter.
And I'm sure there are organizations that do that. I don't know any offhand. But I'm looking at the time. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to read the others. And then I'll kind of wrap this up. And then I'll paste the article in the chat as well. Number 11 says employee growth and development isn't supported. Number 12, we talked about candidates are judged for culture fit. Number 13, managers don't promote from within. Right. So that sends a message of we're not good enough. We always have to. Grass is always greener. 14, managers publicly criticize employees. I can't imagine why that would be toxic.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Number 15, teams are siloed. Number 16, the company doesn't give back to the community. And I think that's really important too.
I think that's valid.
Because it's a whole body approach. It's not about making money. It's about internally and externally happy, being part of the environment in which you are and contributing. Number 17, DEI policies are nowhere to be found. And number 18, employees leave bad reviews of the company. Again, I think that's a good sign.
You think that's going to happen?
Yeah. Okay. So
wow, we are victims once again of the EOW time warp, and it is 43 minutes past the hour. And Sunjay has just put that link in the chat.
So yeah, feel free to take a look if you guys have questions or comments. We always welcome to hear them. In the meantime, I wanted to say, again, no matter what environment we're in, in the totem pole of life, culture can always be better and culture can always be worse. Yeah. And then the question is, how do we choose to contribute to that? Because sometimes silence is approval, and doing nothing actually makes it worse. And other times, the best course of action is to walk away. But I would, without actually picking a number, I would say more often than not, we can, regardless of the position, the situation, and where we are in the totem pole of the hierarchy of the organization, there are certain things we can do to help contribute to move the culture closer to what is a healthier, more dynamic, and more helpful one.
Very well said. Gosh, Sunjay, if I didn't know better, I'd think you were a speaker. Very good. So what's our next date? When do we have another date? October the 2nd. And I say this with great regret that I will not be able to participate on that day. So I hope Mike and Jeff will be here, and you, Sunjay.
I think Michael Motorcycle is there either. Jeff, I'm not sure, and I think I am. So we'll figure it out. It's not your concern. That's a we problem, not a you problem.
That's right.
And, we want to say thank you. As always, we appreciate you guys spending the time and giving us 45 minutes. Hopefully you laugh a little, you think differently, you share with one another, and we are really grateful for the appreciation you guys show us. So thank you.
And we will see you every other Wednesday.
See you, folks.
Bye.
Bye now.